I'd like to call to order the Tuesday, September 8th, 2020 meeting of the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability. We'll start with a roll call. I'll just go down the list. Anna Abernathy.
I'm here.
Jared Alexander.
I'm here.
Bronson Bast. I see his pane, his window pane. Teresa.
Did Joe freeze?
Did I freeze?
Yeah, you did freeze. I think you had just finished Bronson.
Okay. Teresa Chakraborty. Samantha Ginter.
Here.
Nolan Hinden.
Here.
Ethan Horvath.
Here.
Jonna McGee. Andrew Predmore. Dave Rollo.
Here.
Najal Ratsong.
Here.
And Pam Weaver.
Joe, I'm here now. This is Bronson. I think I just.
Okie dokie. So if everyone got the agenda that was sent out earlier, I'd like to motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Okay. If there's anyone from the public who would like to comment, please raise your hand or let one of the hosts know. If there's no one for public comment, we'll go ahead and move on to the report from chair. The only news that I have to share with everyone today is that we are one commissioner down. Corbin Baird has decided to leave the commission, so we will be searching for a replacement for him. And so there we go to report from ESD.
Thank you, Joe. Not much of a report this month. I did want to note last week I was able to present to council the vulnerability assessment, and I had done a short presentation to the commission on that last month. The full report is on the sustainability page, and if you weren't able to make it for last week's meeting, it really just details what types of climate impacts Bloomington will experience and what the subsequent consequences may be for people, buildings, and infrastructure. So that was well received. And then in the next coming months, we'll have a draft of the climate action plan. So for the October meeting, I'd like to give an update on that to the commission. So if we can build that in. And other than that, if any of you are interested, especially those in the policy group, there will be a meeting about the local income tax, proposed local income tax increase tomorrow by council. So just keep your eyes out on that. There's some components of that that would go towards continued energy conservation investments and bike and pedestrian infrastructure, things like that. So I can send out also to the commission the materials that were sent out to council. I think it was Friday, so many people haven't had the opportunity to check those out yet. And other than that, been happy to hear from some of the subgroups in the last couple of weeks. So I'm looking forward to hearing about what you guys have been working on.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. And now moving on to our guest speaker for the evening. We have Daniel Poynter with us. He is with Carbon Neutral Indiana. He's going to give us a brief, give us a presentation and some information about that organization and what it does. So Daniel, I'll go ahead and hand the floor over to you.
Thank you. What time should I allocate for?
Honestly, you can have 15 minutes if you'd like. Or we
Okay.
can go over. We're not hard set on the schedule, on the duration.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm so excited to share with you guys. Thanks for coming together regularly to create a community about these issues. So I don't even know where to begin. I'll share like an origin story. My name is Daniel Poynter. I live in Indianapolis. I went to Purdue for philosophy. And for my 20s, I worked as a software engineer. And then when Trump was elected, I took a break and I started being an advisor to social entrepreneurs. So these are people that either have a for-profit business trying to do a social purpose, like Patagonia or Warby Parker or Tom Shoes, or these are nonprofit executives who are trying to get off grants and try to generate revenue. So kind of where capitalism meets purpose. I was an advisor to about 100 people who were in the middle right there. And then about a year and a half ago, thanks to Dory Chandler's incessant posts on Facebook about climate, I finally woke up. And last year, I just, like a lot of things, just dove in like a fanatic, basically. And for about 11 months full time, I used my life savings to just interview 200 people in Indiana working on climate. Everyone from the Sierra Club to Hoosier Interfaith Power and Light. Andrew Predmore and I had coffee, and Ann Hedden and Lauren Travis, and 200 people throughout Indiana trying to find out who's doing what, where do I fit in, like what are the gaps. And out of that came Carbon Neutral Indiana, which, true to my background, it's a nonprofit, but it's a social enterprise. So we generate our own revenue. We haven't received any grant money yet. And so, you know, Earth Charter Indiana focuses on cities, helping them do resolutions and maybe measure their footprint, like IUERI does as well. Hoosier Interfaith Power and Light focus on churches, right? So nobody's focused on households and businesses or colleges or hospitals and so, but we're focused on households, businesses, and colleges. And our main way of operating is we're fiscally sponsored by the Indiana Forest Alliance. They don't give us money, but we're a part of their 501c3. We get bookkeeping and financial oversight and that kind of thing. And so basically what we do is a household calls me or books an appointment, and in a 15-minute phone call, I walk them through the Berkeley Cool Climate Calculator, and we measure their footprint. And we do the same thing for small businesses as well. And then at the end, if they want to be carbon neutral, they can financially support a project. Right now, it's a forest in Alaska, but we're working to create projects in Indiana. And it's a subscription basis, and it's a basic retail model where, like Girl Scouts that sell Girl Scout cookies, they buy a box for $1, sell them for $5. We buy offsets for about $8.80 and sell them for $15. So our margin is less than the Girl Scouts. I'm proud about that. And the fact that we have a margin at all allows us to grow even without any philanthropic support. So how does this fit into the larger picture? So if you haven't yet, check out Bloomberg's America's Pledge Report. He releases it every year. He has the best minds in the world, from the World Resource Institute to Rocky Mountain Institute, analyze America's grassroots climate action in the face of us leaving the Paris Agreement. And so every year he puts out this America's Pledge Report, and it came out last fall at COP25. And in that report, he basically says, you know, these are the three main things that we need to do. We need to do renewable energy. We need to electrify all the things, buildings and cars and so on. And then we need to invest in land use and natural carbon, natural climate solutions like forests, right? And in that report, they group the states into three tiers. The leaders, like California, that chart the path for everyone. The followers, like Minnesota, that follow the leaders. And then the laggards, tier 3, of which the report expects nothing of us. And I said us because Indiana, according to their analysis, is in tier 3 laggard status. So they're just hoping we don't mess things up. They don't want us to get in the way, basically. So they're not expecting much from us. Okay, so those are the 3 solutions. But in addition to that, they have a broad solution that touches all of the solutions of just carbon pricing, whether that's the cap and trade of California or a carbon tax like the country of Colombia, or something like Reggie on the East Coast, or something else. Putting a price on carbon is a transformative policy that cuts across all different project types. Okay, so back in Indiana, what are we doing in Indiana? Well, we're not going to get a cap and trade program anytime soon. So what can we do? Well, what Carbon Neutral Indiana is doing is we talk about the social cost of carbon. There was an article that said the social cost of carbon is the most important concept you've never heard of. I'd never heard of it. It took me a year of full-time research to find the concept. I'm sure some people here have heard it. But basically, researchers at Stanford University wanted to know how bad is it to put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We all know it's bad, but how bad is it? That's an economist's question. So their number was $220 of damages for every ton we put in the atmosphere, right? That's the problem. It's just an accounting problem. We're externalizing costs, internalize profits. So in theory, it should be simple. We internalize the costs. And that's what CCL and others advocate for, but we're not going to get that in Indiana anytime soon. So we can do that in a voluntary way. What does that mean? Well, you sit down with a household or a business and you calculate their footprint and you say, okay, Joe Schmo, your household emits 40 tons a year. According to Stanford, which is a pretty good bet, that's $220 of damages a ton, which puts you at about $8,000 of damages, right? You're putting that cost onto others in Bangladesh or wherever. And most people, if they trust you and they follow the math, they don't like that. They want to figure out a way to fix it, right? And that's where carbon offsets come in. Last fall, I thought they were just greenwashing. I didn't know anything about them. But when I ran out of my life savings, I thought, my God, who's going to pay for all these emissions reductions? I use ERI as a $50 million fund, but a lot of it is for adaptation, right? Some of it's for mitigation, measurement, and so on, but it's not about getting in front of the problem. I'll take a tangent. My dad had a triple bypass. He was in the ICU for 30 days on the edge of death. And I went out to get a coffee. I sat by his bedside the whole time. And I'm sitting there in the lobby, and on the wall is a huge sign that says, "Thank you to our nurses, brought to you by Cinnabon." And I wasn't smiling at the time. I got really fucking pissed off. And I talked to a nurse. I said, how is Cinnabon thanking? The only reason my dad's here is because he eats shit like that, right? 30 days in the ICU, I guarantee, cost $500,000. Somebody had to pay for that. Why didn't he just get $10,000 of nutritional therapy to help him not use food for stress? We put $10,000 in for preventative and we save $500,000. Makes sense to me. So that's what carbon neutrality is. Instead of externalizing all these costs and paying the costs, who knows what they're going to be? It's probably going to be worse than $220 a ton. Why don't we get ahead of the problem and pay for it now? And Indiana has a special responsibility. We're one of 10 states that produce half of the emissions in America. Thank God you guys are here in Indiana. Many of my friends left, the brain drain thing, you know? So those of us who are still here in Indiana have a responsibility and an opportunity because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, right? So that brings me back to carbon offsets. I thought that's greenwashing. Well, let me frame it in a totally different way. Imagine you've got, no offense to some people, but imagine you've got a small college and they have a sustainability director. They pay him $90,000 a year. With benefits, it costs the college $150,000, let's say. And I've talked to these people, no offense, but this is just fact. And they're very proud that they've instituted a garden and a recycling project. Is anybody familiar with Project Drawdown? Okay, 100 solutions ranked by efficacy.
I'm familiar with Project Drawdown.
Good, okay, good. There's 100 solutions ranked by efficacy.
I'm familiar with it.
Dollar for dollar, what's the biggest bang for our buck, right? We don't have a lot of time, we don't have a lot of resources. Where do we invest our resources to mitigate? Recycling is like 60. Electric vehicles are like, I don't know, 20. Rooftop solar, 10. Plant-rich diets, I don't know, 5 or 6. refrigerant management is number one, because refrigerants and air conditioners have a global warming potential of 1,000 times, up to 7,000 times carbon dioxide. And yet, all these grocery stores just leak and leak refrigerants. We're not doing anything about it. So go back to the sustainability director at the college, right? You pay them $150,000. They implement recycling program, which is awesome, but it's way down on drawdown at 60. And we spend $150,000 for that? A lot of nonprofits, you give money to them, you have no idea where the money goes. You don't know if they're competent at managing the money. You don't know if they're, who knows? Maybe they have an impact report at the end of the year where they say, okay, we talked to 20 legislators and we did this thing. We got 5,000 signatures. Okay, good. You can't really measure policy. Get it. Maybe the climate group does education. So they went to 75 outdoor events and they talked to 20,000 citizens. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Those things are important. We need policy, we need education. But if you want clear impact, that's what a carbon offset is. $15 in, 1 ton out. That's it. And what's really cool is there's an audit trail. Every party in the whole process has to produce paperwork, and it's all available on the internet to read. And what's really cool about carbon offsets isn't not just that they're transparent means of impact, but that they let innovation bloom. There are 200 different methods by which you can create a carbon offset. Forests only have to do with 3 or 4 of them. So the most recent methodology that was accepted has to do with methane abatement in animals. In the UK, 10% of all the cows are in a pilot program, and they're feeding them Mootrol. Mootrol is an all-natural additive. It's garlic and citrus, I believe. You mix it in their food, they don't even know, and it does something to methanogenesis. I think that's the term. It prevents them from burping up 50% of the methane, right? There's 800,000 cows in Indiana. To my knowledge, none of them are being fed a methane abatement. I might be wrong. Why don't we feed those cows something like Mootrol? The farmers can generate carbon offsets and sell them to Salesforce, Microsoft, Stripe, and small dairy farmers are going out of business. They need an extra revenue stream, right? This is the promise of carbon offsets. They allow innovation to bloom, and they bring transparency to climate action, right? Okay, so what have we done in 4 or 5 months with no grant funding, all volunteers? We have 74 households that are carbon neutral. There are 5 businesses that are carbon neutral. On an annualized basis, we've sequestered 2,100 tons. And if the average ton causes $220 of damage, we've prevented $463,000 of damages that would have otherwise occurred, which is really cool. I know that's kind of abstract, but it's so cool. I love that. It's a very effective environmentalist thing, if anyone's familiar with effective altruism. And that's equivalent to taking 421 cars off the road. Imagine if an environmental nonprofit had an Earth Day event and they got 50 people to sign a pledge saying they would never drive again. That would make the news, 50 people. What we've done is the equivalent of getting 421 people to never drive again, right? And even if there's some wiggle room in there, if not 421, let's say half, 210, that's a lot. We got a shout out from Bill McKibben in the New Yorker, which made my day. It made me feel like Popeye eating spinach. When a household goes carbon neutral, they put a yard sign in their front yard. At least 100,000 people see those every day in Indiana. We have one on the Monon Trail. The Monon Trail in Indianapolis gets 1.5 million visitors a year. We also work with colleges. This summer we had 15 summer interns. Many of them were environmental studies students who had internships with IU and Purdue or Cummins that were canceled because of COVID. So we scooped them up, basically, gave them an opportunity. We have about 1,500 signatures with our carbon neutral IU petition, about 2,000 signatures at carbon neutral Purdue petition. The student leader at Purdue is awesome, Mason Merkel. He's running with very little help from me. He had 75 student groups sign the petition, and they delivered it to Mitch Daniels recently. It's awesome. It's absurd that IU had to send a resilience cohort person to measure West Lafayette or Tippecanoe's carbon footprint when Purdue could have done it. It's embarrassing. And the most exciting thing that I'm saving for last we're very lucky to have Senator Mike Braun from Indiana, a Republican who on his Twitter account had a video from Trump congratulating him that he made it. He was successful in business. He didn't have to come into politics, but he did. And Trump said that I was like him, right? And Braun was proud of that. Braun showed that to his supporters. He's very proud of Trump's endorsement. Braun invited us and a few others into his home in Jasper a few weeks ago. And he said that many Republicans are in the closet on climate. They understand it's a problem, but they're afraid to talk about it. And this is a guy who's proud of Trump's endorsement, right? I brought a Citizens Climate Lobby friend with me to that meeting, but Braun wasn't so excited about that particular solution. He likes the idea of a voluntary market-based approach. And I know voluntary might not be good enough, but it's a good start. So we've been facilitating meetings. That's at the federal level. Braun did Growing Climate Solutions Act. It's a bipartisan act to get farmers and forest owners participating in carbon markets so that Salesforce can pay them to do cover crops. But at the state level, State Senator Mark Stoops, his daughter is carbon neutral, Rebecca Stoops. We've been facilitating meetings with Senator Mark Stoops and climate scientist Jeff Dukes at Purdue and Hoosier Environmental Council policy lead Tim Maloney and Indra Frank and Indiana Forest Alliance and others. We've been facilitating about 5 meetings leading up to next week. On Wednesday, state legislature is going to have this thing called a summer study committee. And all morning long, we're going to bring in experts to talk to the legislators about setting up a carbon market in Indiana, right? So we're going to have State Senator Mark Stoops open it up, and then hopefully Mike Braun, if he can make it through Zoom. And then we're going to have a project developer, an expert in carbon markets from Oregon talk. And then we're going to have people on the supply side and the demand side. On the supply side, we're going to have regenerative farmers. We're going to have hopefully the head of the DNR. We're going to have a bunch of people representing forests and farms. And on the demand side, we've been lining up corporate buyers like FedEx, Salesforce, Indianapolis Airport. Not all of them are 100% committed. We're still trying to get them to participate. But what's really exciting is that the sustainability director of FedEx told me last week that they're under a lot of pressure to decarbonize, but they can't because there's no electric airplanes. So I said, how can we help you achieve your climate goals? And he said, what would be very helpful is if we can get farmers in Indiana plugged into carbon markets where FedEx can pay them to do regenerative practices in a verified way. So that's what we're working on. And just to give you an idea of the scale, I'm not going to name names, but there's a small company in northern Indiana, maybe 50 or 100 employees. They already pay $60,000 a year for offsets from forests in California. And they told me that in the fall, when the contract is over, they would like that money to go to Indiana projects. Well, guess what? There are no Indiana projects. Not yet. No forest projects anyway. And there's another company that spends a similar amount of money up in northern Indiana on offsets. So right there's $100,000 a year that could be going to Indiana farmers or forest owners. So this is the tip of the iceberg of what we could do in Indiana when we take a voluntary approach to take responsibility for our carbon footprints, become carbon neutral. And the last thing I'll say is, has anybody here heard of Christopher Hitchens, the deceased journalist? So back when we were debating whether waterboarding was torture, he volunteered to be waterboarded. He was a journalist. He's a famous intellectual, and he's also bisexual. And in 1999, he spoke to a liberal audience about how homosexual love isn't just physical. It can also be emotional. And his liberal audience booed. In 1999. In 2009, there's a video of him saying almost the same thing, and his all liberal audience cheers. Woohoo, you're so enlightened. That's only 10 years. That's how social norms can flip. In 5 years, people are going to say, are you carbon neutral? And then their friends are going to say, of course I am, aren't you? Every decent person is. When that happens, money's going to flow to sustainability projects that are not getting money right now. So one last idea for Bloomington. There's a systems theorist named Donella Meadows. I love her. She has a short essay everyone should read called Leverage Points. And I want to read one really quick thing that is within the realm of Bloomington's authority. This should hopefully inspire you. Okay, she said, quote, "A more recent example is the toxic release inventory. The US government's requirement, instituted in 1986, that every factory releasing hazardous air pollutants report those emissions publicly every year. Suddenly, every community could find out precisely what was coming out of the smokestacks in town. There was no law against those emissions. There were no fines. There was no determination of safe levels, just information. But by 1990, 4 years later, emissions dropped 40%. They have continued to go down since, not so much because of citizen outrage as because of corporate shame. One chemical company that found itself on the top 10 polluters list reduced its emissions by 90% just to, quote, get off that list. So here's an idea for Bloomington. You do lots of business with vendors, maybe tens of millions of dollars a year, I don't know. People do laundry for you launder the police officers' uniforms. You pay people to landscape. You do all kinds of cool stuff. You pay private contractors to help you. What if you said, all things equal, we're going to favor the business that has measured its carbon footprint and released it publicly, or not released it publicly? Or what if you made it mandatory? If you're going to do business with Bloomington, by the year 2022, you have to measure your footprint and release it publicly. Why not? So if there's time for questions, I can answer questions, or maybe you could submit questions by email.
Thank you, Daniel. If there's any commissioner that has some questions for Daniel, I can give you the floor. We can have a Q&A session.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Najla.
So is the goal for Bloomington to reduce our carbon offsets, or for us to attract carbon offset funding of our local projects? Because it just seems like if our overall goal is for us to reduce our carbon emissions, that collecting offsets and funding these various programs, which sound nice, are not going to actually impact that directly, right? How is that actually going to reduce emissions just because people are buying something somewhere else? I feel like there's been a lot of public, criticism of carbon offsets for this reason. And I guess my question is, have you come up against any of this criticism, and how do you feel about that?
What I understand your question is, wait, aren't we trying to reduce direct emissions? Why in the world would we spend money on offsets? Or should we try to get the money from the offsets? So if Cummins wants to reduce its footprint, couldn't they invest projects in Bloomington? So one quick answer to that. Imagine there's a husband and a wife, and the husband swears like a sailor. And for 20 years, his wife has tried to get him to stop because it's bad for the kids. And one day he swears the last time. And she's like, I'm done, Ed, I'm leaving. And he goes, no, Nancy, please stay. I'll do anything. She goes, I've heard that song before, Ed. I've been begging you for 20 years. And he goes, please, this time will be different. And she's like, yeah, okay, it will be different. Every time you swear, you put $10 in this jar. And he goes, F that. And she goes, $10 now. And he peels the $10 bill out of his wallet, and it hurts because he thinks of the beer he could have had. And he puts it in the jar. Now, whenever he swears, he's going to think about it. And she's paid for her emotional labor. For 20 years, she's been unpaid, begging and begging. Sound familiar? The environmental community does so much work for free. When are we going to get paid? So it's a voluntary fee that decent people pay, and it pays for unpaid work, basically. And just paying carbon offsets, especially if the price is high enough, will motivate you to reduce your footprint in other ways. And also, you don't even need to buy offsets. All you need to do is measure your footprint and think about the social cost. That alone will initiate transformation.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rallo, you have a question?
Well, I guess maybe I got a comment, and I think that, this has been really interesting and thought-provoking. I think that, I see what Daniel's proposing as a tool in the toolbox. It's not the be-all, end-all. Of course, communities should try to reduce carbon to the extent possible. Individuals should, but this is one means by which you can, it's a good approach in that it internalizes costs, as Daniel said, and it provides market incentives and so forth. But one thing that struck me, Daniel, was that you invoked Donnell Meadows, who was, of course, a co-author in The Limits to Growth. And so the problem here, it seems to me, is that in a capitalist system that continually demands expansion and growth, you pay for these offsets and things like that, but ultimately you have to recognize that if you lose, because the whole system's growing, so in other words, emissions are growing as a function of the economy growing, because energy and materials throughput increases as the economy expands, then you're sort of trying to catch your own tail, in a sense. So I'm not saying it's your responsibility to talk about limits to growth, and I don't think that Senator Braun would even conceive of that, because he's very libertarian-minded, and so he's for the market. So it's one approach that I think really works, but of course we have to see it, as Nigel said, we have to see it sort of in the context of there are many other approaches, and ultimately we have to think about limits, it seems. But that's sort of a comment. I don't know if you have anything to.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm simplifying in a lot of ways. One thing, we need to reimagine beyond the GDP. Donut economics. I'd recommend anyone who hasn't seen Kay Rayworth has a TED Talk about donut economics. She's an economist from the UK. Really exciting. It's getting us out of this up and up and up to the right. It's a circle. It's a donut. Check it out. And also another quick thing I'll say is there's this concept that needs to be talked about more called the least cost approach. So if I'm a 90-year-old man, I could mow my own grass. It's only going to take me an hour. But the risk to my heart is not worth it. It's better to pay a kid $15 to do it. I could make my own baseball glove. It's going to take me 200 hours. Or I could just buy a baseball glove for $20, So there's this concept of the least cost approach that's important, that we can reduce our direct emissions, that's good. But if the carbon offset is legitimate, a ton reduced in China is the same to the earth as a ton reduced in Indiana. I don't think people talk about that enough. It's not the end all be all, but it needs to be mentioned here. Least cost approach.
Except what you're saying is something reduced in China would be equal to something reduced here, but a carbon offset isn't reducing something there, right? Your programs are actually trying to pull carbon out. That's not the same as reducing carbon emissions. Or are you reducing carbon emissions?
Good point. You can generate carbon offsets generally in two ways: by sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere or preventing emissions that would have otherwise occurred. So the forest project that we support in Indiana, it's a bunch of forest, and all around it, it's being clear cut, but not this forest. It's protected to become old growth. And so that's sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere. You could also generate carbon offsets by preventing emissions that would have already occurred. So if it really is a legitimate offset and it's transparent, you have a journalist investigating the audit trail, and everything checks out, a ton reduced in China is equivalent to a ton reduced in Indiana. The only trick is that the person in Indiana may not trust it, and they're willing to pay more if it's in Indiana because they trust it, they can see it.
Okay, one last go around. Any more questions or comments for Daniel?
I'll leave my email in the chat, and I would love to have one-on-one. I talked all this time. I'd like to listen to anyone for an hour and just listen to what you've learned.
I've just got one quick one, and that is, Daniel, you mentioned you had you made a convincing case that the ranking of efforts is very important to do, because some pay off much greater, right? Like you mentioned the coolants in refrigeration, cows producing methane, for Indiana, what's the most important thing we could focus on? Is it methane emissions from cattle? Is it something else? I mean, where does this effort go? Planting trees, is that the best approach in Indiana? I don't know. What do you think?
We have an intern working on a report based on Bloomberg's report, and we're going to send it to all the mayors of Indiana. It's going to answer that question. In general, I'd recommend you check out America's Pledge because they're smarter than I am. There's like a team of 100 people. Also check out McKinsey, the prestigious elite consulting firm. McKinsey has a thing called Math to 1.5 and how we're going to get there. So look at that. Bloomberg says 3 things: renewable electricity, which we're trying to in Indiana. Others are doing that. Electrify buildings and cars, which people are trying to do. And then expand natural forest carbon sinks. I'll just give you an idea really quick. There's 700 grocery stores in Indiana. They leak 25% of the refrigerants every year. Those refrigerants, GWP is like 1,000 to 7,000 carbon dioxide, right? EPA has a free program called Green Chill, where a grocery store can enroll, and it helps them reduce their leakage from 25% to 15%. Out of 700 grocery stores, only 1 in Indiana is participating. This is a program that an intern should be doing, getting all the grocery stores enrolled in this. There's just so many things to do. I would go back, check out America's Pledge, check out McKinsey, check out Project Drawdown.
Hey, people are watching this on CATS, Daniel. What's your contact info that you could give?
Sure, carbonneutralindiana.org. And you can reach me at dpoynter@carbonneutralindiana.org. Poynter with a Y, DPOYNTER. And anyone listening to this, I'm offering an invitation. I'll listen to you for an hour. Tell me everything you've learned. And thank you for sharing your attention with me today.
Okay, great. Daniel, thank you very much for taking time out of your evening to spend with us and give us a presentation on Carbon Neutral Indiana and all the work that you've been doing. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm going to go. Thank you for sharing your attention. Have a good rest of the evening.
So now we'll go to working group updates. We'll start with the waste reduction working group.
Yeah, so the waste reduction group, this is Anna. The waste reduction group met last week and we had a great meeting of that committee. And so we kind of just talked about 3 different goals that we feel like are actionable within just kind of the remainder of 2020, finishing out the year. So I'll summarize just some of the things that we discussed and then let any members of the committee feel free to comment or kind of add questions or comments that that may have come up. But just to summarize, the 3 action items that we are interested in taking are, first of all, taking a look at all of the apartment complexes in Bloomington. The issue was raised at our committee meeting of just being concerned about recycling in town, particularly within apartment complexes and townhome developments. And so really just taking stock of kind of what are the options and where are the gaps there and kind of doing an audit. So if anyone has resources for that, feel free to reach out and let me know. The second item is a great idea that Samantha had that is actually really to Daniel's point, which is compiling information on how businesses in Bloomington are handling their takeout, because so many people are at home ordering takeout probably much more often. We'd like to compile just a list of which businesses are offering recyclable takeout options or compostable takeout options, just to raise awareness of how much waste that can produce. And then hopefully encourage people to support those businesses that are taking waste reduction steps. And then lastly, we would like to host a virtual event, composting event in partnership with a couple of community organizations. So we have a couple committee members working on that, just to, again, all about raising awareness of composting and some of the options we have here in town, particularly because so many are at home, don't have a lot going on, and so this is a great time to kind of learn about those options. So that's kind of a summary of what we are hoping to work on. So if any committee members would like to add anything, feel free.
Thanks, Anna. I just wanted to ask mainly a question for Lauren, I assume you probably know about openforbloomington.com, where it kind of has the restaurants that have been open during the pandemic, just so people know where to find those type of places. Do you know if once we get this information all gathered, would it be possible for that to like live on that website, or is there somewhere else you would suggest where we could kind of have this information accessible to everyone? We're also planning on like making a PDF that can be distributed, but somewhere where it could kind of live live on a website would be awesome.
Yeah, I think that site was being maintained by Visit Bloomington, but I would have to check. In terms of where it can live long term, once you've compiled the information, I think it'll be a great resource also to have on our sustainability page, because oftentimes that's kind of a landing site to redirect to other places. So as you dig into more options for composting, we can also link to the new drop-off sites at the Monroe County Solid Waste District that will serve people in the county as well. So to kind of build out that resource list, not only for people in city limits, but other places that are people that are looking for a place to figure out where to start.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. Is there any updates from the Sustainable Business Working Group? What about the Policies Working Group? Do we have any updates from them?
Not really any updates on our part. I think there's only 2 of us that expressed interest in it. So this is open to anyone else. If you're interested in it, I'm planning on earnestly sending out an email and start getting us looking at stuff probably tomorrow. And so feel free to let me know outside of this, shoot me an email. I think it's on the spreadsheet. So aside from that, really haven't looked at anything or talk that much. I haven't seen too much policy go through the city that would be applicable for us to really look at. Lauren, feel free to comment on this if you know of anything else. I've more so just been looking at the city council website, trying to keep track of stuff going through there.
Yeah, I would recommend city council tomorrow night at 7:30, the Recover Forward local income tax will be under consideration. Even if you aren't able to attend, you can also write an email to a council member with comments that they can share with the public. Other than that, I think that anytime there's even something coming across another commission as well, so even if it was something in front of redevelopment commission, even if we're not able to attend exactly when the meeting's happening, there's an opportunity to write a letter of support or comment.
Okay, so that brings us to any new business that a commissioner would like to bring up to the group as a whole. Is there any new business that anyone would like to share?
Sure, I'll jump in for just a little bit. So I know I've missed the last couple meetings. I've been in DC working energy policy. There's currently some dockets with the IURC, so the regulatory commission that regulates the utilities. And there's some advocacy groups that are currently going after Duke Energy for some of their practices. I'm hoping to have a draft resolution prepared for the meeting for next month. And if I can get on the agenda, Joe, to kind of briefly talk about that and to pitch the case for why why Bloomington should be engaging in that process to try to get Duke to quit that process, to quit that practice. And it has to do with how they're committing their coal plants uneconomically, which is like slowing the transition to renewables. So I'll hopefully be prepared to talk about that.
Great. Thanks, Bronson. Well, if there are no other items that any commissioner would like to bring up, our next meeting will be on October 13th, Tuesday, October 13th, probably via Zoom again. And with that, I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.